Hi everyone, welcome back to our Joseki series. I'm Ryan and today I will show you 5 to 6 stand josekis. Today we will focus on the 4-4 point and the 3-3 invasion. This has become popularized through the introduction of AlphaGo and the newer AIs. So there are a lot of variations here, so sit back and relax. Here, black obviously has to block at one side. White extends. Now at this point, black could hane. This variation is the simplest and there's only sort of 2 variants. When white hanes, the old accepted version is to extend. White extends and black extends. Keep in mind that here white should not hane and connect, because after the hane and connect, black becomes too thick. So we don't want to. And that's not what the meaning of the 3-3 invasion is. So instead of that, white should pincer here, or split the side, to limit the influence of this wall, and by taking the territory in sente. So this is generally deemed to be a bad result for black. Instead of extending, black could double hane, where white has to capture this, atari and capture the stone, and while black captures the corner in gote. This is an accepted joseki. Black has 10 points of territory counting up to this line, while white has gained some influence on the side. Now capturing the stone is actually very big, and it's very thick shape on the side. Later, white could extend here to develop and limit that side. So later, this is a sente move, so white could develop some nice influence on the side after extending up. Instead of capturing the stone on one side, white could hane on the other side as well. Now this variation is much less common, and you should not pick this unless in special circumstances. Because even though white captures the stone on the other side, black's territory in the corner is much bigger. So in this case, this is only if white really wants to have some influence on this side would white choose this version of this joseki. Okay. So apart from those two, so you might notice that when the black hane move is not very common, because it actually only has that one accepted variation. So usually, the general case is when black hanes, black is going to double hane and capture the corner. The one more common move is to just extend. For this extension, white could play the knight's move, and black can now tanuki, or the follow-up move here, black could either hane or play the knight's move. So I will go over the hane variation, which you will see later in another version of this joseki. So after the hane, keep in mind that the corner is very big right now. So white almost always has to block, because if black gets the corner, this group becomes thick, while the outside white group becomes thin and weak. So white has to respond here, and then black cuts. So at this point, white has 2 options. White could either atari and either atari out and start a fight this way. So the corner is locally alive right now. So white is going to start a fight and split the 2 black groups. The other more calm version is just to capture in sente. Well, black either connects here or connects here. And then now white could tanuki and play elsewhere. Now white has another option of capturing this stone. After capturing the stone, black would atari, and then capture this stone white Atari's here, black connects, white plays the knight's move, black plays here, and now white has the option of either playing the knight's move and develop on this side, or tanuki and play elsewhere. So in this variation, actually, it's very interesting because originally, if you remember, black blocked on the right side, but later, in the end, black developed influence on the lower side instead. So there's a really subtle difference between blocking on whichever side. So this is one possible variation from the extension. Another possible way of white responding, if white has the ladder, is to jump. This jump needs this ladder. So black cuts on the inside, white has to capture. So after this Atari, black cannot ladder the stone, because then if black could, then the outside would be too strong and the corner is relatively small in comparison. So white has to have that ladder, so black cannot do this. And then black would push on the fourth line. And now white has again, two options. So one option is to extend. Now, if after white extends, then black would push and cut. Then now white has to connect on the inside, because if white Atari is here, then this exchange is too good for for black. Now black could play the previous variation and capture the corner, so that would not be good for white. So white has to connect, and then black plays this to Suji. White captures. White cannot go out because the corner is not alive yet, and this fight would not be a good result for white. So white has to capture, and then black goes on top, and white turns. Now, this turn is very big, because if white doesn't play locally, after getting this sente, black is not really afraid of the cut. So the outside becomes a very nice surrounded wall. So this turn is very big to limit black to only the right side. So this is another variation where white takes territory and black gets a little bit more influence. So instead of extending down when black pushes, white could also play this kusumi, and then black would play the knight's move. So this is another end variation, and in this case white gets sente. Sometimes we might see that black plays here. Generally we say that this is not a good result for black because white could Atari. If black pushes, white captures, extends through, but white gets sente and captures a stone, now not on the second line but actually on the third line. So this panuki is a very big for development, both on the side and towards the center. Later in the corner, there's still a bit of aji. So when white jumps, those are the two main variations. Instead of jumping, white could push when black hanes and then hane here. For this variation, if black extends, this is a possibility. And now you might notice that before we had one less stone for white here. So before it looked like this. So in comparison, white has a little bit more territory, but black is much thicker. Especially in that this peep move is not sente anymore, or is less likely to be sente, because black can now extend out to the side instead of connecting back here. So black is much thicker, but again, white has sente and white would split the side and limit this influence towards the right side again. In another variation, black would hane again, and white has to block. And now if black cuts here, you might notice that this reverts back to the previous variation that I showed. If black double hanes now, white would Atari, and then capture this stone. and then black would capture this stone. So in this variation, black has to have the ladder here, because if black cannot capture this stone, the outside would be too thin, while the white's corner is very big compared to the side. So black absolutely had to capture this, and now white would get a ladder breaker. So even though black gets very thick, white gets to be very fast and play a lot of moves elsewhere in the opening. So this double hane move is, after the hane, the double hane move relies on the ladder to work. So can we directly double hane now? So this is a variation that the end result is a bit worse for black. So now black has a choice of either attaring on the fourth line, which then white would capture, and now black would tanuki. But notice that here the white has a lot of territory, and compared to the territory, black's outside is not very strong. The other option for black is to hane on the second line, which then white would also capture. Even though black could get some sente moves, white is still very strong. So again, this is a result that's slightly better for white. Okay, so now we've went through a lot of variations that's related to this extension. Now, what if black plays the knight's move? This is a more common way, actually, to respond to the 3-3 invasion. And you might notice that here, white could extend and then hane, which would then revert back to what we had before. So I will omit the details for that. So now I want to talk about when white attaches. When white attaches, black could again play the previous version of the joseki again. So black could hane and then hane down. So this would again revert back to that joseki, where white could atari here or atari here, depending on the situation. Instead, black has another move, is to hane. This move will result in a fight. And the calm move for white is just to pull back, which then black would play the tiger's mouth, then white would hane out, and then hane and connect. After that, black would fix, and white would come out here. This stone is very big because it connects these two black groups, which would then become very, very strong if black is able to come back and capture this group. So then white runs this stone out, and then it becomes a local fight again. But the corner is alive. So I said this was the calm way to respond. Now, what if white plays here? Notice when I said that in this variation, if black blocks, this becomes the double hane situation again, and which we said was bad for black. So instead of blocking, black has to extend. And now this becomes similar to a 3-4 high approach joseki. When white cuts and hanes here and connects, black fixes, and this goes back to a 3-4 high approach and attached joseki. So I will omit the details here. Now it could become very complicated if white plays here. And now the simple one is for white to just connect, and black would play here. Instead of cutting on this side, white could actually cut on the upper side. Now, then black would kosumi, and white would extend. Then black would extend, and white would hane. And then in order to prevent these two stones from getting captured, black has to either hane here or atari here. So this atari is a trap, and keep in mind that this is will always end up as almost always will end up as a bad result. The simpler way to respond is just to connect. After black connects, white descends, and then black would cut, white would just descend all the way to the bottom to capture this corner. So compared to that, black is stronger on either side, but again, this stone is still on the cutting point, which white would definitely not sacrifice. So again, this will end up in a fight where black would settle both sides and white would run out the stone. A recent variation came out where black plays the hane instead. This variation is extremely complicated. After white plays the tiger's mouth, black would atari, and then hane here, and then after white connects, black would play here. So you would require a lot of reading to actually understand this, and I would advise you not to play this in a real game unless you've actually studied this variation. So the end result is that white would capture this while black gets thickness on the outside. So we've talked about both of those cuts. What if black just extends? Now white would extend and black would extend again. So this variation is kind of similar to before, except white did not exchange this move. So black is slightly weaker, but white is a little better than after this exchange. So this variation is less common for black. So what happens when black tenukis? There's a subtle difference between when black extends, white plays the knight's move in tenukis, compared to if white plays this and black tenukis. And the difference here is that after this, the follow-up move for white is to atari and descend. So white has protected the cutting point here, and while black has almost become a weak group. And if we look at this variation, here locally, the best move for white right now is to either descend or play the kasumi here. So notice that in this case, the three black stones are not as weak because there has much more agi to work with. For example, when white descends here, black would most definitely not exchange this move. So in the end, if you are black and someone invades, if you want a tenuki, you want to extend. If you don't want tenuki, you generally want to play the knight's move. So these are some of the variations for the 4-4, star point, and 3-3 invasion. If you have any questions about today's Joseki problems, leave us a comment below and go to our website. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and don't forget to subscribe below. I am Ryan Lee. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.